I have attended more charity galas than I can count. 40 years on the bench will do that to a man. Every arts society, every hospital trust, every conservatory fundraiser in the city knew my name, and I attended them all with the dutiful good humor of someone who understands that music costs money and money does not raise itself. I had long since made my peace with the gala circuit and expected nothing to surprise me. Then came the evening of the Aldenmere Winter Recital, and the old man in the gray work jacket who sat down at the grand piano, and what followed, which I have turned over in my mind almost every day since, and which I still cannot describe without feeling the back of my throat tighten. The Aldenmere is a grand old hotel in the city's financial quarter, the sort of place that still keeps a full-time piano tuner on staff. His name was Rohan. I had seen him perhaps a dozen times over the years. A compact, unhurried man in his early 60s with close-cut silver hair and large, quiet hands, moving around the edges of gatherings the way good staff always do, present without being noticed. He tuned the Aldenmere's Bosendorfer concert grand before every performance with the focused care of a watchmaker, and when he was done, he would close the lid over the keys, fold his chamois cloth, and slip through the service door at the back of the ballroom. That evening he had finished his work and was doing, I suspect, what he sometimes allowed himself, lingering near the piano for a moment after. Guests had begun to arrive, one hand resting on the closed lid the way you might rest a hand on the shoulder of an old friend. He was not in anyone's way. He was simply there. Mr. Castle noticed him. Victor Castle was the Aldenmere's resident concert pianist, a tall, elegantly dissipated man in his mid-50s who wore his reputation like a perfectly tailored coat and was generous in company as long as the generosity confirmed what everyone already knew, that he was the most accomplished musician in the room. He was standing with a small group of trustees near the champagne table when he spotted Rohan at the piano, and something in the tableau seemed to amuse him enormously. "My dear fellow," he said, loud enough that half the room turned, raising his champagne flute in a theatrical little salute, "don't be shy. That bench has room for one more. Play us something simple. Old man, give us a little warm-up before the real thing." There was laughter, gentle, well-heeled laughter, the kind people produce when they are not quite sure whether to be entertained or embarrassed, and choose entertained because it is easier. I was standing perhaps 15 feet from Rohan, and I saw his face. He did not flush, he did not smile stiffly and back away. He looked at Mr. Cassell for a moment with an expression I can only describe as considering, a long, private beat of something, and then he lifted the lid of the Bosendorfer, pulled out the bench, and sat down. The laughter faded. Not immediately. It ebbed the way laughter does when it realizes the situation has changed around it and it has become slightly awkward. I watched Mr. Cassell's expression shift from amused condescension to something more wary as Rohan settled himself, placed his large hands in his lap for a moment, and was still. That stillness lasted perhaps 5 seconds. It felt longer. The room was not yet quiet. Glasses were still being lifted. Murmured conversations continued. But a hush was spreading from the piano outward, the way a stone's ripple travels across water. People were turning. Then he played. Not a chord, not an opening scale, or a tuner's habitual run. A single note, held for a full breath, so clean and resonant in the Bosendorfer's deep chest that I felt it in my sternum before I heard it with my ears. And then, following from that note as naturally as a sentence follows its first word, a melody. I did not recognize it. I know my repertoire well enough. I have attended those galas. And this was nothing I had ever heard in a concert hall. It was older than concert halls. A folk melody of some kind, I thought, from somewhere I could not place. A simple, repeating phrase, 4 or 5 notes, built from something between a lullaby and a prayer. There was a particular interval in it, a minor third that bent slightly as he played it, that made the hair on my arms stand. The room went quiet before he had finished the first phrase. I do not mean that people stopped talking as a courtesy. I mean they stopped the way you stop when you hear something that asks you, quite suddenly and without warning, to be still. Glasses were not lifted. The trustees near Mr. Castle had turned fully toward the piano. Castle himself had taken a single step forward, and the expression on his face was no longer wary. It was something else. Stripped of its packaging, I think is the only way to put it. Rohan played the melody through once, simply the way you would play it for a child. Then he began to open it. What followed was not a prepared piece, I am certain of it. It was more like a man unwrapping something he had kept folded inside himself for a very long time carefully, in the dark. The lullaby became the root of something larger, a slow breathing, grief-threaded improvisation that moved through those 4 or 5 notes from every angle, finding in them a vast interior space of longing. His eyes were closed. His face was entirely composed. I have heard Chopin played in this hall by people with careers built on Chopin. What I heard that night carried the same quality that the best of those performances had. The sense that the music was not being performed at the room, but offered to it, and the room received it in silence because it had no other answer. Then I heard the sound from the far corner, a small, soft sound, a woman's sharp intake of breath, the sound of recognition, not of beauty. I turned. In the far left corner of the ballroom, an elderly woman was seated alone at one of the round guest tables. She was small and very still, looking at Rohan's back with an expression I did not at first know how to read. Her hands, which had been folded in her lap, were now pressed flat on the table, and her lips were moving slightly, as if she were hearing words she had not heard in decades but still knew. Perfectly, she began to weep. Not loudly, she made almost no sound, but the tears came freely, and she did not raise her hands to stop them. She rose and began to walk toward the piano. The room noticed. A path opened for her without anyone deciding to open it. I saw the woman seated beside her, a younger woman, perhaps a daughter-in-law, reach out a hand and then lower it again. Understanding something was happening that should not be interrupted. Rohan was still playing. He had not yet seen her. She reached the side of the grand piano. She stood there for a moment, one hand resting on the curved wooden edge of the instrument, the other pressed to her mouth. The melody was coming around again. The root phrase, the lullaby, 4 notes and then the bent minor third, and then Rohan opened his eyes and he saw her. He stopped playing. The last chord hung in the Bosendorfer's resonating body for a long suspended moment before it faded. The room was completely silent. I could not hear what they said to each other. They spoke very quietly, and the rest of us were holding our breath. I saw his face change, something long closed opening, and I saw her reach up and place her hand against his cheek with the absolute certainty of someone who has memorized a face from 30 years ago and is finding it again inside an older one. He covered her hand with his. Somewhere behind me, I heard a woman cry softly. Then another. I looked for Mr. Cassell. He was still standing where he had been when the music began, perhaps 6 feet from the piano. He had not moved. He stood very straight looking at the two of them, the old tuner and the old woman, the hand on the cheek, the folded decades, and his champagne flute was at his side, forgotten. He made no sound at all. He sat down on the nearest chair eventually. I do not think he was aware of doing it. I am a retired judge. I have seen the moment when evidence becomes truth, when a courtroom stops being a proceeding and becomes a place where something real has happened. It has a particular quality of stillness that no prepared performance can manufacture, because it is not a performance, it is simply what is. That night at the Aldenmere had that quality. I still do not know the whole of Rohan's story, how long he had been separated from her, or where, or what years lay between. I only know what I saw. A man who spent his life in the quiet service of an instrument, who played one song when someone thought to mock him, and who found in the playing what he had carried in the music all along. When I left the Aldenmere that night and stepped into the cold street, I stood on the pavement for a long moment before I remembered where I had parked. I was thinking about those 4 notes and the bent minor third, and how a song can hold a door open for 30 years in the dark.